Hi everyone, welcome to session 4 of Health Center Association of Nebraska's On-Demand Health Center Board Series. Please join me in welcoming Mr. Burt Waller as he presents today on Board Authority Part 2 from Chapter 19 of the Health Center Program Compliance Manual. Take it away, Burt.
Thank you, Jenna. As Jenna said, session 4 is the second of 2 parts focused on HRSA's board authority requirements. And as with all the sessions, our goals are aimed at increasing your understanding and helping you to avoid a finding of non-compliance during your operational site visit. As referenced in the last session, boards are vital, hardworking, and you want to be sure and get full credit for your efforts. Remember, from HRSA's standpoint, if it's not documented, it didn't happen. And while the site visit includes information from interviews that are very important, but those are supplemental and they don't relate or replace to the primary reliance on written documentation. In our last session, we focused on elements A and B of Chapter 19. And in today's session, we'll be focusing on C, D, and E. And in doing that, we'll be looking very specifically at the requirements of each of these elements and discussing what you need to know or what you need to be sure is documented to confirm your compliance. The health center's minutes and other relevant documents, as we've discussed, are vitally important. And the first issue under element C is, do they substantiate that you held monthly meetings where a quorum is present? Now, this is a very rigid interpretation. So there is no latitude on monthly meetings, and there's no forgiveness if a quorum is not present. What you need to be aware of is that HRSA does not prescribe what a quorum is. It's not necessarily greater than 50%, even though in most health centers it's defined that way. It really is dependent on the wisdom of the board and the state laws concerning not-for-profit organization. So remember, HRSA provides no flexibility for extenuating circumstances relative to monthly meetings and a quorum. In relation to your responsibility for the selection, evaluation, and if necessary, dismissal of the project director or CEO, the best practice really is to conduct an evaluation of the CEO at a frequency you've defined, usually no less than annually. It's best practice that the goals for the CEO are quantified, that there's an opportunity for the input of all board members, and there's a mutual agreement on the results. Even if you don't follow these best practice recommendations, everything you do must be documented. It must be clear that you're holding the CEO accountable. The board's responsible for approving all applications related to the Health Center Program project, including the annual budget. Now, most boards do an excellent job at ensuring this is documented, but sometimes there's a problem with the budget. Be aware that this is specifically talking about the budget as defined in HRSA Form SF424A. And if you've not documented that you've reviewed and approved that format in your documentation, then you're in jeopardy of being found non-compliant with this element. There's a very important board responsibility for reviewing and approving, after appropriate evaluation, your sites, the hours of operation, the services available at each site, and any decisions that are made to subaward or contract for other important services, in-scope services, with a third party. Be aware that the board's deliberations must, in fact, consider the patient's perspective on all of this. And when all services are not provided at all locations, this is especially important. This can be a complex issue for multi-site operations spread over a large geographic area and less troublesome for single-site health centers. Just be mindful that you need to be taking into account the point of view of the patients who are being served by the health center. Another element of element C relates to your monitoring of the financial status of the health center. This monitoring needs to be done at least quarterly, That's a review of the actual financial performance. You can do it more often, but at least quarterly. You also must document that you've reviewed the findings of the annual audit. This can be often done through committee, and that you're actively monitoring any findings of the audit. And if it's not been resolved, that you're monitoring through resolution on an ongoing basis. The board's responsibility for the long range and strategic planning, and this must be documented as having taken place at least once every 3 years with periodic reports to the board by management of progress. Be aware that HRSA's definition of a strategic plan says that it must include financial management and capital needs. And so if you're doing strategic planning that's programmatic or facility focused, don't forget you've got to incorporate the financial needs and the capital needs. And without inclusion of these components, you're in jeopardy of failing to meet HRSA's requirements. Now, element D has to do with adopting, evaluating, and updating policies. In particular, there is a focus on the sliding fee discount program. Remember, the sliding fee discount program has to be evaluated and reapproved by the board at least once every 3 years, but the sliding fee discount scale itself must be updated annually following the release of the federal poverty levels. Be sure that when you're doing this work that you're taking into account the impact of the nominal fee and the sliding fee on the uninsured patients for whom it's intended to serve. The board, at least once every 3 years, has to review and approve the quality improvement and quality assurance plan. And I've not made comments about this because that's normally very well done. I suspect that's because there are implications for your quality measures that are included in the UDS measures you submit annually. And for those of you who are FTCA participants, you've got to address those things and how the board's receiving information in your FTCA application. The billing and collections policies have to be reviewed and approved at least once every 3 years. Now, that may seem a bit strange, but it really is all about, are you being sensitive to the barriers and the access problems encountered by your low income, especially uninsured patients? And so this is about ensuring that you're taking those perspectives into account to not create additional barriers and not reduce access based upon how you've designed your policy for waiving, reducing fees, or the refusal to pay. There's this point here in red that relates to all of the components of element D, and it's about whether you would be able, if asked, to express how you've used evaluations of these various policies and programs to make changes. You'll be asked that, so don't neglect to have that level of familiarity. Element E has to do with your financial management, accounting systems, and your personnel policies. Note that these reviews are often handled by committees with a particular interest in these areas, or by third parties that you've engaged either on a consulting or a volunteer basis to assist with this. If you're relying on committees, as most health centers do, then their recommendations can be brought to the full board with a focus on informing the board of any significant changes. But there is really no requirement that the board in its entirety look in detail at all of these policies and financial management personnel. Now, here are some tricks of the trade that are specific to elements C, D, and E. Develop an annual board work plan or calendar. There's a lot of work to be done, some of it annually, sometimes no less than once every 3 years. In order to avoid overwhelming the board, it's a really great thing to have a work plan or a calendar, and in just another few slides, we'll see examples of those. Make use of committees, especially related to finance and clinical services. These are two areas that can overwhelm the full board, either because of the technical nature of the information or because of the volume of information. So don't be hesitant to empower committees to do the hard work and to bring information to the board for its review and approval. Unless HRSA specifically requires the board's review and approval of a policy or a plan, And you can see from the previous slides, there are really very few of those. The board may delegate the review and approval, and this can be done through a policy that addresses policies. I still go places and see boards spending many hours looking at detailed policies of everything that's included in the health center operations. And when I ask them why they do that, often I'm told it's because HRSA requires it. That's really a misunderstanding of what HRSA requires in terms of the board exercising its responsibilities concerning policy setting. Explicitly document the information that you use that's provided by patients. There are a whole variety of ways to do that. Remember, the reason HRSA requires you to have a patient majority board is to ensure that the voice of the patient is heard, that it's loud and clear, and that you're sensitive to the needs of patients. So be particularly cognizant of documenting patient input or how you're taking into account the patient point of view. As I mentioned earlier, here's an example of a board work plan and calendar. This is an example from an actual health center who developed a monthly schedule following their fiscal year, July through June, showing what activities the board needed to focus on. Here are some other examples. One's a more simplified annual work plan, and the other is an actual calendar, which shows by month the planned activities for the board. Our next sessions will encompass board composition, and then we'll wrap up session 6 with helpful hints for preparing you for the operational site visit. Jenna, you want to take it away and wrap us up for this session?
Thank you so much, Burt. We look forward to seeing everyone for session 5 on board composition, and we hope that parts C, D, and E of board authority were informative today. If you need any additional information on what was shared, please don't hesitate to reach out to Burt or myself. Our email addresses are on the screen. Otherwise, I'd like to thank you so much for your time, and we hope you come back for board composition session 5. We very much appreciate your time. Thank you so much.